Star Trek IV, will it happen? Everything we know the Kelvin timeline could continue in Star Trek IV, but development on the long-awaited sequel project has stalled for years. The current iteration of the big-screen Star Trek film franchise began in 2009 with J.J. Abrams' quasi-reboot starring Chris Pine as an alternate universe version of James T. Kirk. That first film and its sequel, 2013 Star Trek Into Darkness, scored big at the box office and were critical hits. While 2016 Star Trek Beyond was greeted warmly by critics and fans, it struggled at the box office, and Trek's big-screen future has been in question ever since. Despite the faltering of the third film, the likelihood of Star Trek IV seemed high, and there were a universe of possibilities in terms of story. However, Paramount's new take on the Star Trek franchise was introduced with the debut of Discovery in 2017, and the focus shifted to small-screen ventures. Now, as shows like Discovery and Star Trek Picard fade and new projects rise, the chances of Star Trek IV begin to brighten. However, a series of real-world delays has kept Kirk and company off the final frontier for nearly a decade, and the window is quickly closing. Shortly after her co-star Zachary Quinto expressed enthusiasm for another sequel, the latest news confirms that Zoe Saldana has signed on for Star Trek IV. The Kelvin Universe Uhura actor revealed that she is indeed part of the developing projects, though she was also quick to point out that she hasn't read any scripts yet. With writing presumably still taking place on the fourth installment, it will probably take a while for more concrete details to surface. Acknowledging that fact, the star of blockbusters like Guardians of the Galaxy and Avatar made it clear that she wouldn't be waiting around for Star Trek IV to happen. In the first years when these sequels were becoming a thing in my life, I wouldn't do anything, said Saldana. Now I'm learning that there's so many things I want to do. This means Star Trek IV might be further delayed by scheduling conflicts in the future, but nothing is certain yet. Star Trek IV is not confirmed despite the demand for Star Trek IV. The project hasn't been officially confirmed at Paramount. Rumblings of a fourth Kelvin timeline movie began in 2015, a year before Star Trek Beyond, but it has changed several times in the years since. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay were originally tapped to write the fourth film's script, but they eventually departed the project. Fargo creator Noah Hawley was brought on in 2019 after Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek project fell through, but his work was scrapped as well. Various other writers were attached throughout the early 2020s before the latest update, which saw Steve Yockey brought on to pen the so-called final chapter in the Kelvin timeline. However, nothing has surfaced since Yockey was hired, and it's unclear where the development currently stands. Though few details about Star Trek IV's cast have been revealed, it's assumed that the final movie in the series will try to bring back as many of the familiar Enterprise crew members as possible. Zachary Quinto's enthusiasm about Star Trek IV practically confirms he will return to reprise his role as half-Vulcan science officer Spock, and he'll likely be joined by Chris Pine as Captain James T. Kirk. Uhura actor Zoe Saldana has confirmed that she's signed on for the fourth movie, meaning her co-stars likely won't be far behind. The Star Trek franchise has long been a cornerstone of science fiction, a universe rich with exploration, moral dilemmas, and intergalactic conflicts. Since the 2009 reboot by J.J. Abrams, Star Trek has reintroduced itself to a new generation of fans, bringing back iconic characters like Captain Kirk, Spock, and Uhura, while blending them with a fresh and modern cinematic style. With 3 films successfully hitting theaters, the question now looms: will there be a Star Trek IV? The history leading up to Star Trek IV after the release of Star Trek Beyond in 2016, fans eagerly anticipated a follow-up. The third installment, directed by Justin Lin, while not as financially successful as its predecessors, was generally well received for its dedication to the spirit of the original TV series. However, the box office results were modest compared to expectations, which cast doubt on the franchise's future on the big screen. Star Trek Beyond ended with the crew of the USS Enterprise setting off on yet another adventure, leaving the door wide open for future stories. Rumors and speculation about a fourth film began swirling almost immediately. Reports indicated that Paramount Pictures was interested in bringing back the core cast, including Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, Zachary Quinto as Spock, and Zoe Saldana as Uhura. The Chris Hemsworth twist, one of the most exciting early rumors about Star Trek IV, involved the potential return of Chris Hemsworth as George Kirk, Captain Kirk's father. Hemsworth had appeared briefly in the 2009 film, and the plot of Star Trek IV was reportedly centered on a time travel storyline in which father and son would be reunited. This generated considerable buzz, as Hemsworth had skyrocketed to fame as Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and his involvement would have certainly drawn attention to the next film. However, the idea of Kirk's emotional reunion with his father seemed to fade after reports emerged that both Chris Pine and Hemsworth were in contract disputes with Paramount. Rumors circulated that the studio was attempting to reduce the actors' salaries due to Star Trek Beyond's underperformance at the box office. These financial disagreements led to speculation that the film was being delayed indefinitely. Quentin Tarantino's Star Trek? Around the same time as the Chris Hemsworth rumors were swirling, another major bombshell hit. Quentin Tarantino, the legendary director behind films like Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, had expressed interest in making a Star Trek film. Reports surfaced that Tarantino had pitched a story idea to Paramount, and it was serious enough that writers were reportedly brought in to develop a script. Tarantino's Star Trek was said to be a more mature, R-rated take on the franchise, something far outside the typical tone of the series. This idea sparked a significant debate among fans. While some were intrigued by the prospect of a grittier, more intense Star Trek, others feared that it would stray too far from the hopeful, optimistic tone that has defined the franchise for decades. Ultimately, the Tarantino project never materialized, with the director eventually walking away to focus on other endeavors. Though the idea of a Tarantino-directed Star Trek film was tantalizing, it seemed to be yet another false start for Star Trek IV. Noah Hawley's involvement in 2019, another hopeful sign for Star Trek IV, emerged when Noah Hawley, the creator of Fargo and Legion, was announced as the writer and director for a new Star Trek film. Hawley's involvement injected new energy into the projects. Known for his innovative storytelling and ability to tackle complex, character-driven narratives, Hawley seemed like the perfect fit for the Star Trek universe. However, details about Hawley's vision remained scarce, and by late 2020, reports surfaced that Paramount had placed his version of the film on hold. According to insiders, Hawley's story involved a virus spreading across the galaxy, and given the real-world COVID-19 pandemic, the studio was reportedly hesitant to move forward with such a premise. The Kelvin timeline dilemma. One of the biggest challenges facing Star Trek IV has been the question of what direction the franchise should take. The first 3 films exist within the so-called Kelvin timeline, an alternate reality created in the 2009 reboot. This allowed the filmmakers to reboot the series with familiar characters while freeing themselves from the constraints of established canon. While the Kelvin timeline offered a fresh start for Star Trek, it has also led to a certain degree of disconnection from the broader franchise. Fans of the original series and its follow-up shows, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, etc., have voiced their concerns about the reboot's emphasis on action and spectacle over the philosophical and ethical dilemmas that the franchise has historically been known for. There has been discussion about whether future Star Trek films should continue within the Kelvin timeline or return to the Prime timeline, the continuity of the original series and subsequent TV shows. Is Star Trek IV happening? As of early 2025, the future of Star Trek IV remains uncertain. In September 2023, it